When we go live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard, author of the contemporary romance series The Bourbon Books and works of speculative fiction. I'm so excited today to be joined by a real-life time traveler, Nick Jones, who is here 7 hours in the future because he's in the UK. Hello, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Alison. Yeah, nice to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. And as we were talking a little beforehand, we are all very confused by the time change because we've had the time change here in the United States. It hasn't happened in the UK, and we're all kind of confused. So I'm hoping that because your book handles time travel, the Continuum can just fix this for us, and everyone will get it live wherever they are. And Halla Williams says, hi, Halla.
Hi, Halla.
I'm excited to also be hosting the first podcast on my new computer. So if anything really strange happens today, I'm going to blame everything on my new computer, which I got yesterday after my computer died. Now, I don't know if that can be fixed also by time travel, but as you can see, Nick Jones is the author of The Observer Effect, which is the third book in his Joseph Bridgeman series, which is about time travel. Nick, can you tell us a little bit about that book and a little bit about yourself as an author?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as you said, I'm Nick Jones. I'm an author based in the UK. And yeah, I write time travel mysteries. And I think today is the launch of the third book in the series. But I think kind of before I get into that, I suppose it's a little bit of positioning around who the main character is and how he's kind of ended up, in the predicament that he's in the third book. So yeah, Joseph Bridgeman is very much a kind of everyday, ordinary kind of guy. I love time travel movies. I love time travel fiction, but it's often very big. Huge big ideas, and you've got the kind of it's all very sci-fi, and it has to be London, and it has to be New York, and it has to be all those kind of things. I quite like the idea of writing something very small, very kind of quirky, and it being based in just a town in the UK. So I've got the main character is an antiques dealer who, if we go right back, if we just time travel for a second and go back to book one, his life is a complete mess. So he's lost his sister. He spent his whole life in like a really difficult situation, and he discovers through I think when I first had the idea, it was he accidentally discovers he can time travel. So he's getting hypnosis to try and help him. And it's kind of like, oh, okay, so just using my mind, I can time travel. And that opens up. That's how the kind of whole series opens up, I guess. And then in the second book, so I kind of, I'm a big kind of, a Marvel fan. I'm a fan of how they've kind of created those kind of stories. And it's kind of, that to me was my origin story. I wanted to write an origin story about somebody learning I wanted to pace it correctly and to learn about time travel. And then the sort of the second book is like mission one, so that's when he really kind of dives in and discovers that there are other travelers and maybe there's something a bit more organized about this. And then having been through absolutely tons of botched inductions during my time in the real world, I kind of thought, how about you have a botched induction for a time traveler? So book two is absolute mayhem. And as we join him in kind of book three, The Observer Effect, it's been a couple of months since the huge events in book two, and I kind of deliberately left him and the readers with a ton of questions. There's a mysterious organization in the future called the Continuum, and they kind of heal time, and he's kind of one of many time travelers. And in this book, which is certainly more ambitious than anything I thought I'd ever try and write, he goes back to 19th century Paris and is involved in this kind of opera house fire, and there's a missing time traveler, there's a phantom lurking in the shadows. I went full on mystery with this one.
And Nick, you said, oh, I like these small, quiet things. And I'm going, what part of an opera house burning down is small and quiet to you? And I guess I do understand it's not, well, and you mentioned Marvel. There's no laser beams in the sky and aliens coming down, which I appreciate. I didn't need to read that. But as far as a big thing happening, this is still pretty monumental. There's an entire opera house burning down in which miraculously no one dies, which I will say, I listened to your author notes afterwards. I was audibling this, and
Okay.
your author's note afterwards indicated that you thought the idea of these crazy things that happen sometimes in history where you think somebody should have died with this. This is so bad. This was so huge. And for the time, how no one lost their life, that the idea being maybe time travelers got in there and did something. I love that idea. And was that something you had for the whole series, or was that specific to this book? Or where did that idea come from?
No, thanks. That's a great question. I think, yeah, I mean, there's always a temptation to do a George Lucas, isn't there? And say, oh, I had it all mapped out way ahead. Clearly he didn't. But, certain elements I did. And I think that was definitely one of them. For me, when I described it as kind of small stories, yeah, you're absolutely right. These crazy, massive events are happening. And there's me saying, I tell small stories. I think for me, it's in the shadows, you can have this huge event, the Titanic sinking, whatever you want to choose, some huge event in history, but there are always going to be personal and very small stories within those tragedies. So the title of the book is The Observer Effect. And I really wanted to play around with this idea that simply by witnessing events, there's a lot of events going on in the world right now. We're all watching that. We're all connected. We're all seeing it. And that kind of bakes those events into time. So I like the idea. I wanted to restrict myself. That's what I actually started with. I thought, I don't want to write a time travel story where time travelers can just do absolutely anything they like. There's nothing wrong with those stories. There's plenty of them. But I thought, what can I bring that's different? And I think what I loved really early on is this idea of telling a very small and very personal story in the first book. And then when I came to write the sequel, I realized that was going to thematically drive the whole series.
Right.
So I didn't want to just focus on I didn't want to keep going bigger and bigger and just blow stuff up for the hell of it. I wanted to say,
and then you kind of just get a little crazy with it and you lose those small stories.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's the problem. That's the problem with the back half of most of the big action movies, isn't it? They get you invested in the characters and then they just CGI the hell and blow the hell out of everything at the end. And you lose interest, because I think it is about the characters at the end of the day. So what I wanted to do was to base the stories always around real life events. So book 1, 2, and 3, in book 1, there's a flood in his hometown. There's a building works that go around repairing after that flood, and that forms a key part of the story. In the second novel, there's the smog of London in the 60s that was really terrible. I love the idea of that, and I like this idea of stories within that. And then in this third book, the Opera House fire, as you say, it's real. It was a real event, and when I had this vision for this opera house, it kept niggling me for years. And then when I discovered the Salle Le Pletier, the opera house in Paris, that, as you say, it burned down and nobody died, it really spoke to the theme that I wanted, which was this idea that time travelers, they're kind of nipping back. They're like secret agents. They're like nipping back. Stuff gets done, people get saved, but no one kind of knows they're there. And they can only do a very small amount of work. They are not going to be able to go back and stop the opera house fire, which I don't think is a spoiler for the book. That's laid out pretty early
right
on.
away that that's not what they're trying to do. And no matter how many times he's like, oh, this beauty, don't try to save the opera. You can't do it. Everyone's seen it happen. You can't mess with that. Leave it alone.
Yeah. And it's resistance. I think, we all know that feeling of attraction, whether it's to an idea or a person or a thing or whatever it might be. We feel that really strongly. I loved the idea that these things that are baked in, it's going to do absolutely everything in its power to stop you. So it's pointless to try and stop these huge events. But within there, one life can alter the course of history. One single person can change the world. So just because they're trying to save one person in a huge disaster doesn't mean that it's not important, and that potentially it could be involved in healing time.
Exactly. And something you talk about is that's why we can't do things like, well, why don't we just go kill Hitler? Because again, the observer effect, there was too much done. There are, I'm sure, many small stories that could be done around that, little lives that could be touched, but to be able to undo the great evil, it's not possible.
No.
Um, but like you
And
said,
I
that
like that restriction. I like that restriction as an author. That
yes.
forced me to find these major events and then think, okay, how can I make you as a reader care about the people that I'm putting into this mix,
Right.
because I think those small kindnesses, those small little things, I've had, I think about my life and when I've had advice at a very difficult juncture in my life, sometimes just somebody saying the right sentence at just the right time, I look back and think, if they hadn't stepped in and said that at that point, where would I be now? And I love that because that's tiny. It's a tiny little thing. And it's like when a ship is heading from, I don't know, from the UK to the US, let's say.
Yes.
If you
Are we
if you
back on the
take that,
Titanic again?
we are.
Okay.
I'm never gonna write, I'm not gonna say never. But if you then take that ship and you just take it 0.5 degrees off to the side, over a long period of time, it's going to miss the destination completely. And I like the idea that these tiny little nudges could be just enough. So yeah, I suppose that's what I mean by small. I've got it written on my wall, actually. It's small stories, big events. It's just to
I love
remind
it.
me, keep it small. It's about characters and human connection for me.
Well, and it's something Joanne Paulson says, similar view to Margaret Mead, although more individual. Love that. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And
Yeah,
she's
love it.
completely correct. The other
Very
thing you
true.
mentioned, and you moved on to other things, but I want to go back. I love the idea of these time travelers being used as antibodies, that time travel is a way to heal the timeline, that there are these things that are just part of the timeline, but little things that can be changed, and how the time travelers are part of that. Where did you come up with that idea? Because I've read and seen more time travel stuff than I can probably count. I also don't count very well, but I've never heard that concept. Was that something that you'd seen somewhere, or that was unique to you that you wanted to weave in? And was this the first book that introduced it? Because I haven't gotten to read the first ones, so I wasn't sure if that was something the Continuum tells Joseph in this book, or if it had been brought in earlier too.
Sure. It's definitely something that I had a lot of work to do in book 2 to kind of tease in the continuum, but not really, I wanted to start. I'm very cognizant really of trying to pace the series, because I've got 7 books. I've got 7 books mapped out, and it's always a balance of kind of saying, okay, I want to deliver a great story, but I also want to just tease in some ideas. So the idea of the immune system has been with me actually since the very beginning. So when I first came up with the concept of book 1, I did have an idea where I was going with the wider story. I'm actually a real planner at heart, so I had to know that before I could actually write the story. And then I deliberately kept the book 1 story very small, because I wanted that to really be a family story. And then it
Well,
kind
and
of
you don't want to
widens and
throw,
broadens out.
I mean, if you've got 7 books, you don't want to throw everything in the first book, because then there's no growth. There's no growth to the series. And
Sure.
then it all just feels like, well, you just spent your entire ammo. 1 book, you're done. What's the point? Where else can we go from here? So I love that you can introduce these characters and some of the concepts in a more intimate way, and then explore as the series goes on, but as big as number 3 goes, I'm a little scared for number 7.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? But do I try and go bigger and better? I think you have to raise the stakes. I think as long as readers care, I think I'm not always going to necessarily want to have
Blow
things
more
burning to the
things up.
ground or whatever. Yeah, no, but I think it is a case of raising the stakes. But I think, just to go back to the idea of the immune system, I think that fascinated me because of the way our immune systems work. When I kind of thought, again, it was one of those things when I was coming up with the concept, if you like, for the whole series, and I was working on book 1, and what I would do is I'd just plaster my writing room just with these kind of conceptual ideas and things that I knew would become, in my previous life, I was into sort of branding and corporate kind of, I was in the kind of corporate world. So it's always about what are our values and what are our core beliefs and all that kind of stuff.
Our
And I
mission
thought,
statements.
Exactly. And I thought, actually, as an author, and for this series, I want to do the same. I want to make sure that I stay on target. So I kind of came up with a bit of a mission statement for the series, which was, small characters, big events, and that kind of thing. But another one of them was that time decides. And that was one that I kept coming back to. I kept coming back to that because I think it would be hell on earth if we could decide.
Exactly.
What to go
And that
back
was
and
one of the
change and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and that's one of the lovely things about it, because I know that's something Joseph keeps asking. So he asks his partner Gabrielle in this, and he asks other people, well, how do you decide which things? And they have to keep telling him, we aren't the ones doing this. We aren't choosing these times that we're going back. These are the times that time itself needs it to correct, and that in a way, time itself is sentient. And I know I've joked like time is just a construct, and you're just making it sentient. So it's like somewhere in there, you've given it a personality, and it's starting to be the one to call the shots. But I like that, because I like the idea that it's not, well, I'm going to go back and fix the things in my own life, because as we start this book, Joseph has a lot of things in his own life that are not really going well, and he's stuck with the ramifications of his past time traveling and some of the past things that have happened, including a woman who's not exactly happy with him at all.
This is true, yeah. So I wanted to I knew that I wanted a kind of love interest, because the poor guy was so lonely in the first book. He'd been through a hell of a lot of grief and bereavement and all of this kind of thing. And I think, I knew that I wanted a love interest, but I also knew that nothing comes easy. And particularly for a time traveler, if he's, there's a particular scene that really inspired me. The film Back to the Future is the reason I write novels. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. I don't want to talk about the second and third film, but the first film.
And I love that you're not even quoting like, oh, great literature or Shakespeare. No, it's Back to the Future.
I'm an uneducated heathen, I'm afraid. But yeah, for me, it's movies are where my inkwell gets topped up, actually. I love fiction. I listen to audiobooks quite a bit, particularly, Ray, obviously. But, movies are the thing that there are thousands in my head. And that definitely, basically, that's where it all comes from. And there's a scene in Back to the Future at the very end where he's like, Mum, you're so thin, and Dad, and this, that, and the other. And he's kind of like, he's back, and he's got his whole family back. And they're all like, you're wearing a suit. And he's like, I always wear a suit to the office, Marty. Marty's got no idea what's going on. He's got absolutely no idea what's going on.
And they don't know why Marty's acting like a weirdo.
No. And the thing is, everyone kind of walks out the film because, he kisses Jennifer at the end and the doc turns up and everything's great. I walked out the cinema kind of thinking 2 days and his family are going to think he's had a brain hemorrhage.
Yeah, he's going to end up in one of those hug me jackets and in a very padded room.
They're going to say, Marty doesn't even remember what we had for breakfast yesterday. He wouldn't remember anything. So
he doesn't know the name of our dog or that we have a dog.
No, and the kind of darker side of Back to the Future, which I'm not necessarily saying they needed to explore in dark depths. We don't need a Joker version of Back to the Future. But, I think what I wanted to explore was the idea that Marty McFly, the version who lived that life with successful, happy parents and everything was fine, was vaporized on that morning that he got back.
Because he replaced himself?
He replaced himself. So here's the Marty, here's the sad Marty who's back, and he's completely replaced himself. And you kind of go, okay, so that's an entire person you kind of wiped out. And to me, I wanted to mine into that. So therefore, to come back to Alexia, the kind of love interest in the stories, I just thought nothing is going to come easy. And I want to take, again, it's about pacing. I want to take my time. I think relationships, they take time and they can be, they can be difficult. And I thought and also for a time traveler, at any point, if we ever get to the point where that's being kind of discussed openly, it's going to be complicated. You got to be up for that.
Well, Laura Jacko says, I love seeing how different authors handle time travel. There are so many ways to do it. And I did want to ask you and bother you with your favorite time travel tropes that you are not using in your books. You already said Back to the Future, so that has half of them with the silly device and the mad scientist adventure. And you do have kind of, I would not say that you have any mad scientists in there. You do have a kind of a surfer character who
we've got some scientists going on.
Yeah, but I like how you don't take hey, here's all the stereotypes, and here they are with their little gadgets and gizmos. You have people who kind of feel more like they've wandered out of other 80s movies, like maybe Point Break, instead of
Nice.
instead of any more classic time travel or sci-fi movies. So
Yeah.
are there others coming for us that we will see more kinds of things, more tropes, or are there other tropes that you like from other things that you go, I'm not going to explore, but I do like? Is there going to be a hot tub? No hot tub time machines?
Actually, there is a hot tub.
There
is a hot tub, but it's
Well,
not
on Joe's-
involved. It's not in any way linked to time travel.
It's therapeutic, and it's on his balcony. And I
Exactly, yeah. It's just a hot
I
tub.
move in with Joe.
Yeah.
That sounds really nice. He's got an antique
Yeah.
shop.
Exactly, yeah. In terms of the kind of tropes, I guess like I said earlier, I didn't want to do the big kind of, if we don't, we have to go back and stop this entire thing, otherwise the world's all over. Although I'm kind of heading that direction. I mean, I think
you're getting bigger.
Yeah, I guess I am. I mean, the overall concept is, if you think about the fact that time has created an immune system,
Yes.
and when you said earlier it's sort of sentient, I like the idea that, when you think about your immune system, you don't have to think about healing a cut. Your body takes care of that. Is it sentient? Well, it's doing its thing. It knows what to do. Yeah, we are, but it is.
But I have
isn't.
to put the Neosporin on, or
sure. Your immune system does what it needs to do. So, I think once I'd hit on this idea that actually time decides what needs to be done, that the immune system is healing time. We just need to do our bit. The time travelers are the antibodies within the immune system. So I guess once I'd got that, I didn't really feel like I'd really seen anyone quite do it that way. So I think by leaning into that felt like that was my thing. And therefore, I suppose in some ways I've tried, I suppose, to avoid some of the tropes. However, I do love I just watched the Adam Project on Netflix. I love all of the futuristic kind of, the big chamber with the huge machine and all the kit and all the cool gadgets. I do love all of that stuff. But I thought, if I'm going to do it, I don't want to go full on sci-fi. I want this to feel so realistic that people just say, you know what, this just feels like it could actually happen. And I don't believe that people in 200 years are necessarily going to be walking around with huge pointed necklines on their long trench coats, that we're all going to have neons instead of eyeballs. I don't think it's necessarily going to be that different than it is now. We're still going to have people living out their lives, doing their thing, and they're just going to have extra stuff in the same way that we've got extra stuff to make our lives easy. The fact that you and I are having this conversation now, all I've done really is just extrapolate out how I think that would work if it was instant communication across relative universal space-time.
Exactly. Well, and I laughed because one of the things that we got for Christmas around here, it was my husband's Christmas gift, is he got a new VR set, which replaced one that he returned a few years ago because it didn't quite work the way he wanted it to. And you have a scene where he's got the Oculus. I don't know. I'd have to look to see what it is, but I've played a few rounds of Beat Saber, but that's about it. He's done other things on it.
Love Beat Saber.
Last night I'm reading to my 11-year-old in the next room, and we had to close the door because we can hear some upbeat, crazy music coming from the room next door, and it didn't go with what we were reading. And I'm like, Dad's on his headset again, and he's over there doing this. And I'm like, bedtime in 3 minutes. And he's like, yeah. So I closed the door, put out the music, but the part you have parts in there where, because he's communicating across time, Joe has like an overlay of where he is versus where he actually is physically standing. And I'm like, that's what the VR headset does. So I don't trip over stuff. It has the same grid lines and it tells me exactly where I am to keep me in that space. So it was very easy to project that. And I'm going, so Nick must have a VR headset, and it's probably playing Beat Saber right now. I don't know. Do you have a VR headset? Are you doing?
I've certainly tinkered. I do love all that. I do love all that kind of thing. And I think obviously the big buzzword right now is metaverse, and everyone's going to basically. We're all going to
charge you for saying that. Yeah.
Sure. And I kind of think, I think in some ways you and I are in the metaverse now. We are. Ways of communicating people will do what they want to do. They'll go to where it's cool. They'll go to where it's fun. They'll go to where it's actually useful. So I kind of think if it's useful to be immersed, I think human communication is where I get interested. I couldn't care less about shopping in the metaverse or going to parties in the metaverse. I'm like, really, that sounds dystopian and horrible to me. But the idea of if you and I could be sat in a more three-dimensional environment and it didn't feel like I had a briefcase on my head, then I'm up for it.
It's not quite that heavy, but I do understand. I think the number one purchase my husband has made since then, besides more games, is he keeps getting new things to adjust the headset. So it has like a fan on it and a different clip in the back and all this. I'm going, what is all this? He's like, oh, but it feels better now. And he sticks it on me like, okay, it feels better. But every time I take it off, it takes my glasses with me. And then I can't see for a while. So I'm just like, help me get out of this. I'm stuck in the metaverse. But I do like that fact that it is for communication. And whether it's something like this platform where you're in the UK, I'm in Orange, California. I know that I joke that half of my friends, most of my friends are not in my own time zone. I know where they are and we're never in the same time zone. And so when I'm making breakfast in the morning, that's when I usually am talking to my friends in the UK because it's later in the day for them. And I don't talk to them at night because it's like 2 a.m. for them and they probably don't want that. And that's just kind of the reality now, where when I was growing up, that was not something that we could have been doing because we were going to be doing a long distance phone call for $8 a minute. I mean, I wouldn't have even had these people as friends, and especially in the writing community. And I'm friends with writers literally all over the planet. I baited for someone who's from Malaysia. How would I have gotten to do that a few years ago? I wouldn't have. So I'm all in favor of technological advances that makes us a smaller planet and more connected. I'm not so sure about talking to people from the future, but if it happens, I'm not going to say no. I like that. And Hala Williams says, I love time travel books. Time Traveler's Wife is one of my favorites. So I'm not so sure about the romance aspect.
Yeah, I think that certainly that book had a huge impact on me as well. I think seeing how she, again, I think that's a really good example of kind of crossover, I guess, a crossover time travel novel where it was, I had friends who were reading that who would never read sci-fi, for example. So that was, she clearly managed to cross over. She created a romance. Again, that's a small story, almost to the point where, I can remember some people saying that they felt was it ambiguous that he was even a time traveler? I'm like, yeah, no, he was. But it's kind of,
it doesn't make sense.
it's a kind of very small, very character-driven story. And I think when I read that one, I also read Stephen King's JFK time travel story. And I think
11/22/63.
That kind of reassured me that first-person time travel that you really kind of care about is definitely possible.
Well, and he takes that as far as the small change to the big change, because in that we start with, okay, well, can I fix this one smaller story before I'm supposed to, as the title gives away, address the assassination of JFK? Which
the way he kind of unwraps that. Sorry to talk.
No, you can unwrap it. You can unwrap
the way that. Yeah, I mean the way that he kind of, I think from a craft perspective, I mean that's something that I've been doing this for about 6 years now, and that's probably the thing I've worked on the most. I've got a shelf behind me just full of books about how to write, because I think you even when you've written a novel, you don't know how to write a novel. Every single one is completely different. So I think when
here, author's note, you can't read my writing, it's terrible. I know how to do it, because this was in your author's note about how you said, I know how to do it now, right? Wrong. Apparently it doesn't work that way, at least not for me. And then you go on. So go ahead. You're beating me to the punch, because I don't usually take a lot of notes, but I'm like, I had to stop and get that down verbatim from the audio.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah.
I'm putting it on a shirt.
It's a funny one, really. I mean, you would think that, I think just to start off with the Stephen King novel, I think it was, when I read a book now, or when I watch a movie or anything, I'm always kind of working, and that sounds a bit sad, but it's actually not. I kind of love it so much I don't care. But I'm sort of looking at things through two lenses. So I'm watching it as I'm going to say watching it. Let's just stick with movies. So I'm watching the film, and I'm experiencing it and I'm enjoying it, but I'm also analyzing it, and I can't help that now. I'm breaking down, why does something work? Maybe why doesn't something work quite so well? But often that's a really good I think of them as like little story engines, and I'm kind of like, okay, that's a really nice little story engine. That's put him in a difficult situation. He's now got a dilemma between those two characters, and I'm constantly kind of analysing it. And I think when I read the JFK story, I can never remember the date, but anyway, Stephen King's JFK
11/22/63. I'm not good with numbers. For some reason, I remember that because it's a book title.
I think the way that he unwrapped, the way that he unwrapped the rules of time travel in that novel. I mean, obviously Stephen King is a master of his craft, but I was in awe of that. You know, the way that he bit by bit explained that, you know, you carve that on a tree, it's going to be there later. You go back, you change something else, but you forgot the tree's not done anymore. And you kind of, he builds up these rules that make you, and at the end of every sort of section of that book, you kind of go, oh, so that means if he doesn't do this, then that won't work. So I think that's a really incredible book in terms of craft. And I think, so I'm always learning the craft, and I'm always I've got, you know, notes coming out of my ears in terms of that works, this works.
To be fair, Stephen King's book is about this big, so it's about equivalent to 3 normal size books. So it is, he had time to do all that because his book is massive. It
is massive. Yeah. He doesn't tend to write short these days, but
he does stories. He just, if it's a novel, it's a huge one. If it's a short story, there you go.
And we just,
but so you've got your craft notes. Yeah, you've got your craft notes, and you're stacking through these, and you're working on this series. And so you're saying, you'd think after book 2, book 3 should come easy, and then it's like, oh, just kidding, this is like starting all over again.
Yeah, I think for me anyway, you know, I'd written a couple of novels before I started the Joseph Bridgeman's one, so I'm into kind of, I guess I'm working on my 6th now. So you kind of, people would say, oh, okay, so you know what you're doing. And you kind of say, yeah, look, I'm not going to be silly about it. Yes, I do know what I'm doing. I do know how to, I mean, one of the things I think is when somebody's run a marathon, and I almost said childbirth the other day, but what the hell do I know? But, you know, the people say it, don't they? It's like childbirth. You kind of forget the pain, and you kind of think, oh, let's do all that again. But I think with something like a marathon, you know, when you're running a marathon, knowing you can do it is part of the battle. So finishing your first novel is a hell of a, well, you've had this, I'm sure, you know, finishing that first novel, you kind of go, okay, I can actually do that. And when each book you do, there's a separate part of my confidence that builds up on the back of that kind of says, okay, I know I can do this, and I know that I can get a book done. But every single book I've followed a different process, and and every single book I've gone through the same process. So my partner Kay has seen me euphoric as I've come up with the idea, and I'm babbling on about all this amazing stuff this book's going to have. And then she just laughs, makes me a cup of tea, and gives me a hug when my head is my hand, saying, I can't do this, I'm going to have to call it all off. And I heard, I'm thinking of the composer now. There's a Hans Zimmer. So Hans Zimmer talked about that. I'm not comparing myself to Hans Zimmer, but he's a genius.
Well, he could possibly compose soundtracks for your movies because he does.
Well, that would be heaven,
that would be the ideal.
He would be my perfect. Yeah, he would actually. But he, when he was asked to do the Gladiator soundtrack, he almost spoke to Ridley Scott and told him that he couldn't do it. I mean, he went through absolute torture, and he says he does every single time. I think it's the creative curse in a way. I mean, I just think if you care, if you really care.
That's, I think, the key. It's not
I can't put out a book unless I've given it my absolute all. I'm not going to put that book out.
That's exactly right. I think that the people who can, and I don't want to speak badly about anybody's process, because we all have different ways of getting through it mentally. But I know there are people who are just like, I can sit down and I do it, and whether the words are coming or not, they're done, and that was my job. And that's just never been how my process works. And there are times when it's like the process isn't there, and I could sit down and write, and I will have to delete all of those words because they're just not happening. And then other times the faucet's just on and flowing, and I'm like, I've always said, if I could just keep the faucet on or off and turn it off when I don't have time. Like, I know it was one of those things where I just finished my 4th novel in the series I'm writing last Thursday, and it should have been done earlier in the week, but I had kids who all decided they wanted to get sick and miss various days. Like, I was ready Monday, 2 of them were home. Tuesday,
they'll do that. They will do that.
Tuesday, okay, I got a little bit done, and then Wednesday, another one comes back from being sick, and I'm going, where are you guys conspiring against mom? Because I thought you liked me. But again, I can't just turn it on and off, and it would have been nice to turn it off rather than have the head going crazy during that point in time. So I get it. Like every time the process is a little different, every time when the story has to be a little different, because you're not just replicating the prior novel. Each novel is a little different. Even if you're dealing, like you were writing a series, I was writing a series, we're dealing with characters we know and we should be able to, but then that's another challenge is, oh, but is this true to how the characters would have been in the prior story? You can't just be like, well, I'm just going to make them do whatever, because then people are like, Joe would not do that. I wouldn't expect Amy to do this. This isn't what I expect anybody to be doing in your series. That's not what the Continuum does. You need to be able to have people know what they're getting with these books. And if you totally pulled oh, by the way, in this one, everyone dies and Joe's an axe murderer, people would have been like, Nick, what are you doing?
This is not what I signed up for.
This is not what I signed up for me. Oh, and Hal said they will do that. She's correct. Hal is a fellow author. And she knows what readers are going to do and or beat you up with your own book over the head if you start messing around with reader expectations, which is just
I've been through. I went through earlier on, in the sort of series when I was independently publishing them. I actually had a really good team of readers who kind of were ARC and kind of beta readers, and
wait, do you say beta? Do you say beta instead of beta?
Beta readers, yeah.
Like the ones, okay. So beta I joke, we say beta, which I think of the little fish, and then you say beta, like it rhymes with pizza pan, and I like it because it's your accent. I'm gonna start calling it that too. And if anybody says, I already get called out for using inappropriately English phrases as an American.
I get called out for using American phrases, so we're probably.
Do you really? Can we just swap? One of my betas is always like, Allison, they don't call it petrol here. Allison, they don't call it uni here. You can't call it trainers. And I'm like, all of our American words for those are stupid. And I'm going to use the English ones if I want to. So there. So we can swap. So, we can have all the American ones.
Let's do it.
I'm taking British ones. So your betas, what were they saying back when you were doing this as more?
I was just thinking about the kind of process of novel writing, and I think I put my I was just thinking about how I put them through hell. Really, I gave them a very, very early draft of one of the books, and they basically correctly pulled me over the coals and said, "Okay, that's not right. That wouldn't happen. This person wouldn't do this. This person wouldn't do that." And it was a learning thing. I think one of the benefits actually of getting the publishing deal was the fact that I was actually then able to work with a really, really good editor, and I think that's been a baptism of fire for me in absolutely the best way. That's because I want to get better. As I said, I've mentioned it already. I take the craft of writing really seriously. I never imagined myself doing this. I'm not exactly academic or anything like that. So for me, I've always got this sort of chip on my shoulder, which is
not Shakespeare.
It's I'm just I don't know, Marty. I'm just I just don't think I could take the rejection. It's that kind of, there's that in me as well, that kind of paranoia of not being good enough. I've got the imposter syndrome that most authors have, I think. So always trying to work on the craft and always wanting to get better at storytelling. And so, that's what I'm always trying to work on, I think.
Well,
the editor is where it really helps. Having an editor meant that I could really dive in and just learn. I was so up for learning, and I was up for rolling up my sleeves and working hard.
Oh, Laura, I think, is appreciative of your Back to the Future impression.
I don't think I got the line right, but it's something like that, isn't it?
It's close. Okay, she's like, wait, what if they say, get out of here, kid, you got no future?
Yeah, that's it. There we go.
She can probably do it better because Laura also cosplays, and I'm always seeing her do line readings, and she's actually who I want to bribe to do my audio books at some point, because she does one of the, I wouldn't say villains, but one of the antagonists in the first book so well, it's frightening. And I'm like, you are her. She's like, did you base it on me? And I said, absolutely not. This is just a coincidence that your name is awfully close to her. I'm sorry. But I wanted to ask about the whole, you went from being an indie author to a traditionally pubbed author, and you re-released the first book. And there are lots of authors who are indie and then go traditional, or they continue to do both, maybe in one genre for one, and then another genre under your even a different name for another. And I haven't heard, it isn't very common, where someone gets a book deal for a book that's already been out as indie and then gets republished. Can you tell us how that happened, and who did you have to, I don't know, was there a voodoo doll involved or some kind of time travel? How did you make that happen? Because that's actually the dream for lots of folks.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest, it was the dream for me as well. I think I quite like, I mean, at the end of the day, I've got a publisher for these novels, but it's only the novels. So to me, as an author, whether I end up being hybrid, whether I go back to being indie, I don't know. So there's definitely pros and cons for both, I think. I was very happy, when I first started writing, indie felt a bit like punk. It felt like a movement. There was this new thing happening, and that we were really kind of challenging, I suppose, the gatekeepers, and you didn't need permission to publish. And thank God for that. I'm so happy about that. And I think for anyone who's thinking about writing a novel, I have lots of people contact me. Actually, I feel like I've got a parallel universe where I'm a sort of writing coach, because
you do put your email address at the end of the book.
Well,
and you're like, I read everything. I'm like, Nick, are you crazy? Did you actually?
I am
just
crazy.
I do. Your private email. I mean, now I just want to start sending you memes just to be like, hi, Nick, what's going on? I won't.
I think I believe in karma. Put it that way. I believe in karma, and I think I want to. If I can help somebody, I want to try and help somebody. And I know the torture that I went through when I first considered writing a novel, and there were tears. It's hard work. It's definitely hard work. And I think if anyone is at that point, that it's so delicate. Yes. I think a creative vision, a creative soul. Everybody I've met who's in any way creative, deep down, well, anyone, not everyone, most seem to be quite. That element of them is quite delicate. And I think when you've got this idea, it doesn't take much. It was like when you're a kid at school and a teacher kind of says, you can't sing, you can't dance, you can't do this, you're terrible at that. That stuff, or your parents or whatever, that stuff really goes in, and it can be life damaging. So Absolutely. To me, if anybody comes to me and wants some help, I always want to try and help them if I can. So yeah, I have this kind of sort of parallel life of being a bit of a coach for people if I can do it. I've completely lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
Well,
Why am I talking about helping people?
Journey from indie to trad, because you re-released the first book and it changed its title. But I'm assuming that was pretty much the big thing that changed, was the title, to be able to do that. Because so I will speak from my own personal experience. My first book was with a small publisher, and then we parted ways, and I've republished that. And at the time, my agent specifically said, I cannot shop this, and I cannot shop the rest of the series. I already had a second book written, a third book in process, and a rest of a series planned. And I was told, won't be touched, because this was with a small press and traditional publishers have no interest in that. And so I basically said, okay, for this series, I'm indie and I will do that. And meanwhile, I will continue to do my speculative stuff down the traditional pipeline. And that's where I've been going so far.
And that was absolutely my expectation. When I started writing the series, I was I published them. Actually, the first time I published the book, I released it in episodes, because Stephen King did that on Green Mile, and I thought, I'm going to try it. So I did every 6 weeks I would publish an episode of this time travel story that was in my head, and it was like I say, it was indie. It felt like the punk thing. It was exciting. I had the music cranked out. I was just blasting out my stories, and I just loved it. I kind of wrapped it all up into a novel, and I thought, you know what, I'm not done with this character. I want to write another one. And at that point, I was hitting a bit of a crossroads with my kind of career, and I thought, actually, this is what I want to do full time. So as an indie, I went full time. It was absolutely nuts. I couldn't afford it. It was a stupid idea, but I loved it. And then just completely unexpectedly, I was contacted by Blackstone, so the publisher in the US. Who
does a lot of audio? Shout out to the audio.
A lot of audio. Yeah, a lot of audio. And I wasn't. Yes, I kind of secretly was pining for, I guess, some form of recognition is the wrong word, but just acceptance, I guess. Thank you very much. Validation. So I guess I was looking for some kind of validation. It's hard as an indie to get that.
Yes.
And I just kind of saw
that expectation that without those gatekeepers and that stamp of approval, that you're somehow still lesser than. And I know that that's not valid, that idea.
Totally. But that's where I was at. That was the point that I was at. Yeah, that was the point I was at in my own kind of journey. And I thought I was looking for that validation. And ironically, I think I just got to the point where I thought, you know what, I don't need it. I'm going to do this anyway, and I don't care.
So maybe that's when,
that's the trick. Don't care.
Validation. You'll get the validation.
You get the validation. That's karma. That's the way it
Yeah.
works. But
It's the whole, when
anyway,
you're not looking for a date, then
that's
you get
right.
asked.
Just be cool, man, and it comes along. So
I'm never cool.
apparently this is the way it played out. And I if this is wrong, maybe somebody will eventually hear this and tell me it's completely wrong.
No.
But apparently someone took a copy of the book. So I guess I remember why I was telling you all of this. So this is the reason, if anyone is thinking about publishing in India and they kind of think, oh, I only want to do it if I'm going to be properly published and all that kind of stuff. I was very happy indie published. I actually created paperback editions. I loved it all. I wanted it to be as pro as I could be. I actually paid an editor and a proofreader to do it. I treated it as a business. I took it seriously. I spent money. I didn't make any money. I spent all of it on the covers and the editing.
You spent the money to make sure the product was comparable to the traditional publish, because you had all those same pieces. The editor,
I'd never written, I'd not been to I'd not been to university. I hadn't done like some great big creative writing course. I thought I don't know everything, so let's get other eyes on this. Let's get professionals to look at it. So I went through that process, and then somebody took it to a family barbecue, I believe, of the boss at Blackstone, handed it to him and said, "You need to publish this guy."
That
apparently is apparently, I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of what I've heard. So they got in touch with me and said, look, we're interested. Let's talk about it. They're a thoroughly great bunch of people. We just had a few conversations and we talked about what it was going to mean. And then I've done it all back to front. Then I got my agent because I didn't know what I was doing. So I said, look, I need an agent to make sure that we negotiate correctly and that it's all done correctly. I didn't know how to do it. So I got my agent involved, and he's fantastic as well. So yeah, it kind of all reverse engineered itself to the point. And then I know it's not normal to basically have two independently published books that have been out. One of them had been out for a couple of years to then get published. And it was a huge risk for the publisher because they were worried, I suppose, that had it done its thing. The fact that I went back and rewrote those books, I say rewrote, heavily edited them, is just because by that point I'd marinated enough in the author life and the series itself. I tonally and thematically knew where I wanted to go with the series. And as I say, I'd written that first book in such a flurry that I kind of thought, I don't love it when people say, I want to go back and tinker with what I did before. But I knew that if this series was going to have a chance, there was consistent feedback that I had from readers, even though they loved it. The consistent feedback was always, it's so slow to get going. Don't give up on this. It gets really good. And I'm a big believer in feedback. So, if a lot of readers are saying that, these were people giving me 5-star reviews, but they were saying, gosh, I'm almost through this book across the room at 25% in. And that's just an experience of me as an author. I wasn't grabbing people quick enough. I thought I had to do a lot of work first. So, I did fixes that I think were necessary, and they were up for it. They said, look, we're going to give you an editor. We want to work with you on this. So they've been great to work with. And by the time we finally got to this one.
See, I have it on my phone, so I can't really. I mean, I might crack screen.
It actually arrived in the post today. I'm having a George McFly day. This is the books arrived in a box in the post today.
I love it.
Yeah,
happy
it's actually
release
out
day.
Today. Thank you very much. So yeah, by the time I got to do the third book, I'd been working with my editor a while, and I was in my stride at that point. So yeah, super excited to actually finally get something new out. There's been people who've been with me for years who've had nothing from me. I'm like the slowest author on the planet.
No, believe me, there are people who are still mad because a certain video game was released instead of finishing an epic series, but that's none of my business.
Are we talking Elden Ring?
Yeah. I don't play the game, and all of us are just like, you don't get to go do video games instead of finish series, but apparently you do when you have
playing, start writing. Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I know.
And there are others that I will not name names of people who have multiple years between books, and we're all just like, eventually we're going to forget what happened, and I don't know who this redhead character is anymore, but I think I can pronounce his name, maybe. I won't say more than that. But no, I mean, I think there's also different expectations about cranking out books versus traditional authors, where there is kind of an expected gap between books. And of course, that varies by publisher and how quickly. I've talked to authors where they're like, yes, I got this multi-book deal, but then I got this other deal over here, and now I've got 3 books due within this year, and I'm going to go lock myself in a basement for a while. Bye-bye. And we're lucky they had time to talk to us, because they sit there and don't even have time to come up for air. So I think most
I can't do it. I mean, for me, the indie schedule got to the point where I kind of thought, I don't know if I can really, if I want to make a career out of this, I'm not sure. I was actually at that point where I was thinking, I don't know if I can compete at the level. You've got whale readers who, are basically reading those books like Plankton, and they're going through 10 a week. They're just
I don't know why
them up, and I'm
like, that's what it is with the Bailey whale.
That's what it is. They are whale, they're whale readers, and I'm like, I can't compete at that level. It takes me a year to write a book. It's just the way it is.
Well, and there are writers who are able to do that, who just can just churn it out, and it's high quality, and that's amazing. And I wish I could be able to do that at that speed. And I know I joke because people say, "Oh, you do write really fast," and I said, I do when that faucet's on, but I can't control turning that faucet on. And so I can go from I've been struggling at this word count for a while, and then I'm done with the book in 2 weeks, which is incredibly fast, but it took me 8 months to get to that point. It's
exactly. Yeah. I mean, the writing of a book, again, we're mentioning Stephen King again, obviously a big influence, but he says a book should take about 3 months to write. I think that's probably about right. It obviously depends on the length, but a 80 to 90,000 word book, 3 months, you're going to go, okay. But my problem is that I can do that. In fact, that's about right for me. Yeah. But I have to have, I need nine months to plan it.
Oh, so because with you're planning it, so and okay, and Laura's making fun of me because she said Allison does write incredibly fast, because she's one of my beta readers, and she also takes the cake for, she's like, I'm your slowest beta reader, but you're also my favorite, so I love you, and it's fine. But she does know how quickly I can sometimes be in that groove where I'll be like, I'll start sending you the early chapters, and by the time you get them done being read, I will have actually finished the rest of the book, so we'll catch up. But again, it's and Hala says she's the same, rush and rest. And everybody's process is different, but that is true when you're dealing with the people in the indie community. There is this expectation of you have to have a lot of books coming out quickly in order to do that. And a lot of them will have these massive series and just keep coming through. And if you're one who takes longer to either plan it or needs more time in between, that's really hard in order to do that. And there's also the expectation that you won't really gain a readership until you have a series done, because of those binge readers who are like, well, tell me when I can go eat 7 books in one setting. And you've got to cater to those people too. So I think sometimes it's hard, because there's sometimes the expectation that indie readers want one kind of book, traditional readers want another kind of book. And I think a lot of people would like it where it's just, you can choose either path, and the people will find your books who like those kind of books, regardless of indie is like this, traditional is like this. There shouldn't be that distinction, but sometimes the business model kind of forces it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have, my mantra is just to write what I love. So
yes,
I will always be writing books, but I don't know whether I'll be able to, who knows? I mean, it is a business at the end of the day. I've got to make money. So for me, I think hybrid appeals. I quite like the idea of maybe writing some shorter fiction and I'm never going to say cranking it out, because I just can't do that. It just takes me too long. I can't do it. Yeah, but so I will do what I can do, and that's makes it a lot easier then. And for a long time I was working another job, and I was writing in the mornings and doing a different job in the afternoons and stuff like that. So you don't have to go all in straight away, and I may have to go back and do other kind of work to support that. Who knows? But for me, it's just about making sure that I'm creating stories that I want to read, and that seems that so far that's served me well. People say that they enjoy reading the books, so I'm happy.
Well, I was going to say author coach, because if you're already kind of doing that, then down the line you're like, oh, I'm going to step back and also do author coaching on the side for a small fee. Yeah,
it's one of the other things. I mean, the two things. Well, one thing's got to happen, so it needs to get made into a film or a TV series. That's That's something I put out into the world every single day, and I know that's the dream for lots
I
of
will
authors.
add that. I will add that. Please.
The chances of that happening are so tiny, but it's out there. That's how I write. That's how I write them.
It's very cinematic. I mean, you describe these things. I can completely see them. So fan casting, who is Joseph Bridgeman?
So that's an interesting one. To start with, it was Mark Ruffalo, but not so much these days.
Because he's
an age thing, isn't it?
Or because he's the Hulk?
No, not because he's the Hulk. I think he's probably just an age thing. And then other times I'm like, is it a British actor? Is it kind of like, Martin Freeman?
Okay, Martin Freeman, amazing. Okay, he's also a Hobbit. Here's the thing. So I listened to it, and you had the amazing Ray Porter as your narrator, and it took me a minute. I'm like, I know this voice, and then I had to look it up. I'm like, yeah, because the very first audiobook I ever listened to was narrated by him, and I've probably had 4 or 5 others by other authors. He does a bunch of stuff. Yeah. Joseph has an American accent in there because Ray does, and then he does accents for other people. Should Joseph have a British accent, or was that a narration choice that you're like, okay, Ray, I'm going to let you get away with it because he just won an Audie for doing Hail Mary, so he can do what he wants? I don't know.
So I think it's a good, that's something that he and I talked about. So it was definitely a choice. Okay. And I have to be honest, that was a really, really difficult decision. Ray is not a difficult decision. Ray's an instant yes.
No, he's great because he does British accents in there, but he's not.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but I wanted him to feel I wanted him to be as relaxed as possible. And to be honest, I'd actually had, in my mind it was going to be a British narrator, but then I listened to the Bobbyverse books, and Ray just captured that kind of quirky kind of first person thing so well.
Right.
I actually
the one that says, "We are Legion, we are."
I care so much about the performance that I'm just gonna let that go. And Ray comes with his own audience, and I have to say, at that point, I really needed the books to find an audience.
Yeah.
And the US audience is just bigger for audio, and I knew that was that's Blackstone's kind of stomping ground. That's their bread and butter. So it was a commercial decision. I have to make those occasionally. It wasn't a difficult one. Ray was my first choice. But I knew that I would get some pushback on that because, it wasn't so much a British pushback. Novel.
It for me, it took me a minute because it was my first introduction to realize, I'm like, wait a second, Joseph's British. Why does he not sound British? And I'm thinking, well, okay, because Ray's an American, and okay, but he is doing British accents over here. But it does make sense that if most of the time he's doing narration, he's going to do it in his own speaking voice.
I don't want him to be, I don't want him to be
having to that. Exactly.
And I look at the reviews on audible.com, and a couple of people mention it out of the hundreds of lovely reviews on on the audible.co.uk. There's a few more people kind of saying this is kind of weird. It kind of took me out of it. And I get that. I mean, hopefully one day.
Yeah.
Like this. maybe I'll record them one day and then everyone can shut up about it.
No, then we'd be like,
they can have the option.
Well, and again, I have the opposite problem because I joke, I want a British narrator, and some of my favorite narrators are British, and there's absolutely no reason for any of my books to have any British narrators, even if I have occasional British characters, but there's no reason that the main character should not sound like me. And I'm going, yeah, I don't sound totally British. This doesn't make any sense, but can I have it anyway? And I'm sure if I ever had that, someone would say, no, you can't have a British narrator just because you think it sounds cooler and you like the accent.
No, unfortunately. Yeah, I think when I listen to the audiobooks, within a few seconds, Ray's performance is so good that I just get lost. Even it's very strange listening to your own stuff narrated by Ray because I've listened to like Hail Mary and I get lost and I go off. I'm off into the story, and then when if I haven't, with this book, this has been quite a while since I finished the third book, and listening back to it and hearing Ray narrate that and getting lost in the story, that just any concerns just melt away at that point because he's such a good performer that to me he brings the whole story to life so well. That I'm like, yeah, it's cool.
That must be so surreal to be like, I'm hearing this person read my words and perform them, and it's not even like I wrote them anymore because he's elevating to this different thing, this performance.
It's a chance. It's a very rare chance to glimpse just behind that curtain of what it might be like for a reader to actually read my own work.
I love it.
You don't get that opportunity very often because, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I read, when I've done my pages for the day, I read them to Kay, we talk about it. She gives me feedback, all that kind of stuff. I read it out loud a lot. And, so I know those words intimately inside and out when I'm writing the novel. Give it 6 to 8 months or whatever, and I've kind of forgotten half of it. And to then hear Ray narrate that, and to have completely forgotten certain elements, and then him bring so much to it that I get lost in the story. It's just a glimpse, and I get that little tingle of like, this is cool. That's an amazing feeling, because you kind of think other authors do that for me, and the idea of that I might be able to do that for them it's an amazing feeling. Yeah, and it's so cool to hear Ray narrate it.
Well, I hope that we also eventually will get to see, I don't know, an Amazon Prime series or a movie. I mean, when you've got a series of books, I always say then that's just fodder for a series. 1 season per book. It works out very easily.
I think TV would work really well. Yeah.
We just have to figure out at what time this gets filmed to figure out. I'm not exactly sure how old Joseph is, trying to figure out then what actors. I'm like, Kit Harington. What's he doing right now? Okay, now I'm dream casting and I'll stop. You're like, no, he's too young at this point, but he can grow the facial hair so he can kind of age up. But we just hit the hour mark. I usually try not to keep people this long, but we've been having fun. I've been having fun talking to you, and we've had great people commenting and contributing. Thank you everyone who's been watching live, but I should let you go because I think it's your bedtime. I mean, probably not quite yet, but it's late for you.
Well, it's gin and tonic time.
It's always gin and tonic time. Well, cheers to you, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad
it's been fun
to be on your release day. That's amazing. Everybody go out, get The Observer Effect. If it's not in your bookstores yet, then go ahead and start with the first 2. It starts with, and then She Disappeared, and then The Shadow of London. Is that correct? Or The Shadows of London?
Actually, it's probably worth mentioning for this month, to sort of celebrate the launch of The Observer
Effect. Yes.
To celebrate the launch of this one, so that's the 3rd book in the series. We've actually made book 1 is actually free on ebook at the moment. I think pretty much on every platform. So book 1 is free.
For that.
That's called And Then She Vanished. And then the second book, The Shadows of London, that's 99p or 99 cents on the US and UK store, I believe. So yeah, I mean, now is a great time to get into the series if people like the sound of it.
Yes, binge them, and then you're ready to get your brand new copy of The Observer Effect, which every time I go to pull it up, it just keeps showing me. It tells me to keep signing into my thing, but it was the last thing I listened to on my NetGalley, so I got to listen to it that way because it wasn't out yet. I couldn't get it on Audible, which is
of course, literally landed today, and we've got the 4th book. 4th book's coming out in November, so yeah, I'm
Does it have a title you can tease us with?
Maybe. Yes. The Quantum Chain.
The Quantum Chain. I love it. Okay. Anything with the word quantum in it, I would probably just binge buy without knowing anything else. But now knowing it's in this series and by you, it's on my list. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us. I would love everybody to come back. April 5th is our next episode. And I'll have Rachel Barenbaum, author of Atomic Anna. Get a load of this cover. This is so cool. In the meantime, every week on Vox Vomitus, you can catch me and co-host Jennifer Ann Gordon talking to authors of all genres, not just the speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, and romance that I adore. Thank you, everybody watching live. And if you're catching this on the replay, hello, thank you for watching. If this is on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nick. Thanks so much. See you later. Bye.